The thrum was a constant, a presence more than a sound. It resonated through the polished obsidian of the floor, up the fluted columns of solidified light, and into the very bones of those assembled in the grand conclave of the Vex Imperium. It was the hum of a civilization at its apex, the quiescent power of 1,000 conquered worlds held in fealty, a sound that had not been interrupted for millennia. Yet today it was underscored by a silence that felt far louder, an unnerving void that had crept in from the galactic rim and now held the heart of the Imperium in its cold grasp. At the center of the immense, circular chamber, suspended in a column of anti-gravity, floated the High Imperator Vorlag. His chitinous plates, usually a resplendent shade of iridescent crimson, seemed muted in the ambient glow of the star charts that swirled around him. His multifaceted eyes, each lens a universe of strategic calculation, were fixed on the empty space where a communication sigil should have been blazing. The sigil of the punitive armada, the sigil of warlord Kael'thar, a silence that had now stretched across cycles, each passing moment eroding the bedrock of Vex certainty. Before him, arranged in descending tiers of political and military significance, the representatives of the Imperium's core species waited. There were the Lumina, their forms little more than woven light, their thoughts rippling through the chamber as subtle pressures against the mind, counseling patience, advocating for deeper analysis. They were the archivists, the historians, the keepers of cosmic memory, and they had cautioned against this venture from its inception. They spoke of echoes in the deep-time records, of species that rose like brilliant, fleeting stars in the sector the humans called Sol, only to vanish without a trace. Their warnings had been dismissed as arcane superstition, the timidity of a species that had traded claws for codices. Then there were the Gorok hegemony, hulking brutes encased in biomechanical armor, their representative, Grak, exuding an aura of barely contained impatience. Their worlds were resource-hungry, their industries insatiable, and the small, blue-green world of the humans had been deemed ripe for assimilation, its resources a trivial bounty to be collected. It was their pressure, their relentless lobbying for expansion and demonstration of Vex might, that had ultimately sanctioned the warlord's mission. And there were others, dozens of vassal species, their delegates silent and watchful, their allegiances shifting with the political tides, their own futures hanging on the outcome of this unnerving quiet. The silence from the Perseus arm is no longer a matter of logistical delay. Vorlag's voice was a low growl, each word resonating with the authority of his station, yet tinged with a dissonance no one had heard before. It is a tactical reality. Warlord Kael'thar's armada, the pride of our outer fleet, has ceased all transmission. He turned his gaze upon Grak, the Gorok's massive form seeming to shrink infinitesimally under the weight of the accusation. You assured this conclave that the species human was a pre-stellar primitive, that their world was a chaotic nest of warring tribes, their technology little more than chemical propellants and crude fission reactions. You called them loud apes, Grak. You promised a swift, surgical subjugation that would serve as a lesson to all nascent powers on our borders. The Gorok representative shifted, the servos in his armor whining in protest. Imperator, the data was sound. Our deep-range scouts confirmed their technological status. They are a fractured infantile race. There can be no other explanation than a localized stellar phenomenon, an unforeseen gravitic anomaly. The warlord's fleet will re-establish contact. They are invincible. His voice was a rasp, a grinding of stone on stone, yet the conviction in it felt hollow, a desperate prayer disguised as a statement of fact. A soft, chiming resonance filled the chamber, the voice of the Lumina delegate Olena. It was not spoken, but felt, a wave of thought that washed over every being present. Certainty is the cradle of hubris, hegemon Grak. We have seen this pattern before. The galaxy is vast, and its annals are filled with the obituaries of empires that believed their power to be absolute. This species, these humans, they have been broadcasting into the void for less than 2 of their centuries. Their signals are a cacophony of art, mathematics, and conflict. They are by all measures primitive, and yet an entire armada equipped with singularity cannons and phase-shifting armor has vanished while approaching their cradle. We advised that this cacophony might be a camouflage, a deception designed to present a mask of simplicity. The universe does not often permit such loud children to survive without a powerful guardian or a secret of their own. The thought wave was gentle, yet it caught. Ride the weight of eons of observation. It was a truth the Vex, in their martial pride, had forgotten. The deadliest predators are often the ones that appear harmless until it is too late. The silence was not a void. It was an answer. It was a statement from the humans, delivered without a single word. And as the minutes stretched into hours, As the star charts continued their silent, indifferent dance around the High Imperator, a new feeling began to coalesce in the heart of the Vex Imperium, a feeling they had not truly known since the dawn of their conquests. It was a cold, unfamiliar dread, the fear of the unknown, the chilling possibility that they had not sent an armada to crush a minor nuisance, but had instead thrown a stone at a slumbering leviathan. The tension in the conclave had become a physical entity, a crushing weight that suffocated debate and left only a grim, collective watchfulness. The Gorok had fallen silent, their blustering confidence replaced by a stony, defensive posture. The lumina shimmered with an aura of sorrowful vindication, their silent thoughts a constant, gentle pressure that said, "We told you so." Even the High Imperator Vorlag seemed diminished, his powerful frame coiled with a frustration that had no outlet. An enemy that fought back could be understood, could be met with strategy and force. But an enemy that simply erased? It was a concept that had no place in the Vex doctrine of warfare. Their entire history was a saga of glorious combat, of overwhelming power, of subjugation and assimilation. They knew how to conquer. They did not know how to contend with a void. Scouts sent to the edge of the Sol system, nimble stealth vessels designed to be ghosts in the ether, had met the same fate. They would approach the theoretical boundary of human-controlled space, and their signals would simply cease. No debris, no energy signatures of a battle, no final, desperate transmissions. They just stopped being there. It was as if a line had been drawn in the fabric of spacetime, a line that could not be crossed, and the Vex, for all their might, were staring at it like a child before an unscalable wall. It was into this suffocating silence that the impossible happened. A single clear signal pierced the miasma of fear and uncertainty. It did not originate from the lost armada, nor from the missing scouts. It appeared without warning at the very edge of the Vex core systems, a mere handful of light-years from their primary naval bastion. The sigil that bloomed on the main hololith was not one of any known species in the Galactic registry. It was simple, elegant, and utterly alien. A perfect circle, bisected by a single vertical line containing a smaller circle in its upper half. The signal was not a threat, nor a declaration of war. It was an open, unencrypted broadcast, a hail in 1,000 different languages, including the High Vex tongue, though it was a dialect thousands of years out of date, dredged from the deepest archives. The message was as simple as it was audacious. This is the diplomatic vessel Unwavering Resolve, representing the unified species of humanity from the star system Sol. We request permission to approach the Vex homeworld to open formal diplomatic dialogue with the leadership of the Vex Imperium. We come in peace. The conclave erupted. The Gorok representative, Grak, slammed a massive fist onto his console, creating a shower of sparks. A trick, a Trojan horse. They annihilated our armada, and now they send a single, paltry vessel to our very doorstep. It is an insult, a prelude to an invasion. We must destroy it where it sits. His rage was a blunt instrument, but it resonated with the primal fear that now gripped many of the delegates. To them, this was the ultimate act of psychological warfare, a demonstration of such profound arrogance that it bordered on madness. The smaller vassal species murmured amongst themselves, their fear palpable. They had allied with the Vex for their strength, their promise of security. Now that strength seemed illusory, and a new power had appeared at the heart of their empire, uninvited and unopposed. But Vorlag held up a clawed hand, and the chamber fell silent once more. His multifaceted eyes were fixed on the serene, elegant sigil. His mind, a whirlwind of strategic analysis, was processing the sheer impossibility of the situation. How had they bypassed the Imperium's extensive sensor nets? A single ship, appearing from nowhere, deep within their most heavily fortified territory. It was not a military impossibility, it was a physical one. The Lumina delegate Olena once again projected her thoughts into the chamber, a calming balm against the rising tide of panic. Consider the nature of this act, High Imperator. If they possessed the power to destroy an armada without a trace, why would they send a single ship? If their goal was conquest, they could have sent their entire fleet, assuming they even use such archaic concepts. This is not the act of a warrior. This is the act of a scholar, a diplomat. They are not showing us their strength, they are showing us their control. They are demonstrating that our borders, our defenses, are meaningless to them. They are not asking for permission to approach. They are informing us that they are already here. The logic was cold and inescapable. The request for dialogue was not a plea from a position of weakness, but a courtesy extended from a position of unimaginable superiority. They had not come to fight, they had come to talk. Vorlag felt a chill run down his spinal column, a sensation he had not experienced since he was a young hatchling. For the first time in his long reign, he was not the one dictating the terms of engagement. He was being summoned. With a slow, deliberate gesture, he activated his own console. The transmission went out, carried on a tight beam of directed energy, a response from the mightiest empire the galaxy had known in 10,000 years. "Your request is granted," he broadcast, his voice a low, steady baritone that betrayed none of the turmoil within him. "Approach and state your purpose, but be warned, vessel of humanity. The might of the Vex Imperium is gathered here. Any sign of hostility will be met with absolute annihilation." It was a hollow threat, a necessary piece of political theater for the benefit of his conclave. And he knew, with a certainty that froze his very core, that the beings on the other end of the transmission knew it too. The human vessel, the unwavering resolve, was a masterpiece of understated design. It was small, no larger than a Vex diplomatic shuttle, a smooth, featureless teardrop of a material that seemed to drink the light around it, reflecting nothing. It moved without any detectable form of propulsion, no engine flare, no gravitic wake, gliding through the void with an unnatural grace. It settled into a geosynchronous orbit over the Vex homeworld, surrounded by a fleet of warships so vast that it blotted out the stars. An entire sector fleet had been recalled to form a bristling sphere of steel and plasma around the tiny, silent ship. The display of force was overwhelming, almost ludicrously so, a desperate attempt by the Vex to reassert their dominance in a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of their control. Yet the human ship remained placid, its presence a calm, unblinking eye in the heart of a hurricane. They had not requested a landing. They had requested a dialogue, and so the conclave remained assembled, their attention now fixed on the main hololith, where a communication channel had been opened. There was no grand ceremony, no exchange of diplomatic credentials. The hololith simply shimmered, and the image of a human appeared before them. It was a female of the species, her form frail by Vex standards, her skin pale and soft, her hair the color of spun silver, tied back from a face etched with the fine lines of age. She was seated in a simple chair, her hands resting calmly in her lap. She wore a plain, dark blue garment devoid of any rank or insignia. There was no throne, no honor guard, no trappings of power. The background behind her was a simple, unadorned gray wall. The sheer austerity of the presentation was, in itself, a profound statement. It spoke of a confidence so absolute that it required no external validation. The human looked out at the assembled might of the Vex Imperium, her expression one of serene neutrality. Her eyes, a pale, translucent blue, seemed to gaze past the hololith, past the layers of technology, and into the very soul of every being in the chamber. Vorlag felt an unnerving sense of being seen, of being understood in a way that was both invasive and deeply unsettling. "I am Ambassador Eris Thorn of Humanity," she said. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying an unexpected weight and resonance. The high Vex she spoke was flawless, not the archaic dialect of their initial hail, but a modern, courtly tongue that only a native speaker could master. The implication was staggering. They had not learned their language from ancient archives, but from listening to them live for an indeterminate amount of time. "I thank you for agreeing to this dialogue, High Imperator Vorlag." Her gaze settled on him, and for a moment he felt like a specimen under a microscope. "We have come to deliver a message, a warning of sorts, though we hope you will come to see it as an invitation." The word warning hung in the air, a cold, sharp-edged thing. Grak the Gorak could not contain himself. His voice boomed through the chamber's audio pickups. "A warning? You dare to speak of warnings to the Vex Imperium? You who ambushed and destroyed an entire armada of our finest warriors. Your species is a stain on the galactic record, a band of primitives who have stumbled upon a weapon you do not deserve. Your arrogance will be your undoing." Ambassador Thorn's gaze shifted to Grak. She did. Not flinch, did not react with anger or fear. There was only a profound, almost weary patience in her eyes. "Hegemon Grak of the Gorak," she said, her tone even. "We understand your anger. It is born from a misunderstanding of the events that transpired. Your armada was not destroyed." A murmur swept through the conclave. What could this mean? They had seen the sensor logs, the abrupt cessation of every life sign, every energy signature. "Not destroyed?" Vorlag pressed, his voice sharp. "Explain yourself, human." The ambassador made a small, placid gesture with her hand. "To destroy implies an act of violence, of malice. It implies an ending. What occurred in the Sol system was not an act of war. It was a quarantine enforcement, a necessary and, I assure you, non-lethal disarmament." She paused, letting the words settle. "We did not harm a single member of Warlord Kael'thar's fleet. We simply removed their ability to pose a threat. Their ships, their weapons, their very capacity for interstellar travel. It was all taken away." "Taken away?" Grak scoffed. What meaningless riddle is this? Where are our ships? Where are our warriors? Ambassador Thorne's pale blue eyes held his gaze. They are home, she said softly. Warlord Kael'thar and every individual under his command have been returned to their respective homeworlds, to their barracks, their homes, their families. They will be confused. They will have no memory of the past few cycles. To them, it will feel as if they simply awakened from a long sleep. But they are alive and they are unharmed. The chamber fell into a stunned, disbelieving silence. The concept was so far beyond their understanding of physics, of warfare, of reality itself, that it bordered on the divine. To pluck an entire armada from one sector of the galaxy and deposit its constituent crews individually and precisely back to their points of origin, all without a single casualty. It was not technology. It was magic. It was the power of a god. The Lumina delegate Olena shimmered brightly, her thoughts a wave of pure, unadulterated awe. They did not destroy, she projected. They de-escalated. They did not kill. They disciplined. This is not the action of a primitive race. This is the action of a species so far beyond us that our concepts of war and peace are irrelevant to them. Vorlag stared at the image of the old woman, his mind reeling. The sheer ethical and technological chasm that had just opened up before him was terrifying. The Vex, in a similar situation, would have annihilated the human fleet without a second thought. They would have celebrated it as a glorious victory, a testament to their strength. The humans, faced with an unprovoked invasion, had responded not with anger, but with a calm, paternalistic act of disarmament. They had not treated the Vex as an enemy to be destroyed, but as a child to be disciplined, a child playing with forces it did not understand. The insult of it was more profound than any military defeat. It was a complete and utter invalidation of their entire culture, their history, their identity. They were not a mighty empire. They were a galactic nuisance, and they had just been sent to their room without supper. Why, Vorlag finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why show us such restraint? Why come to us now like this? Ambassador Thorne's expression softened, a flicker of something that might have been sadness in her ancient eyes. Because you crossed a line, High Imperator. A line that has been in place for longer than your species has walked on two legs. You did not know it was there. For that we grant you a measure of grace. But your ignorance almost caused a catastrophe of unimaginable proportions. We are here to ensure you do not make the same mistake again. We are here to show you what you were truly attacking, not to intimidate you, but to educate you. With your permission, I would like to transmit a file to your Conclave's central archive. It is a recording, a sensor log from the bridge of Warlord Kael'thar's flagship, the Indomitable Will. It will explain what happened, and it will serve as our one and only warning. Vorlag felt a knot of cold dread tighten in his gut. He had a terrible feeling that what he was about to see would change not only the future of his Imperium, but his understanding of the universe itself. After a long, heavy moment, he gave a single, curt nod. Proceed. File was transferred instantaneously. There was no download time, no buffering. One moment the archive was empty, the next, the data was there, pristine and complete. The hololith in the center of the conclave flickered, the image of Ambassador Thorne replaced by a new scene. It was the command bridge of a Vex Annihilator-class dreadnought, the Indomitable Will. The view was from a fixed security sensor high on the back wall, looking down upon the crew. The detail was perfect, the audio crystal clear. They were not watching a recreate. They were watching a memory. The bridge was a hive of controlled activity. Vex crew members, disciplined and efficient, moved between their stations, their voices calm and professional. In the center of the bridge stood Warlord Kael'thar himself, a giant of his species, his crimson armor gleaming, his expression one of supreme, arrogant confidence. On the main view screen before him hung a beautiful, swirling marble of blue, white, and green. Earth. Status report, Kael'thar's voice boomed, filled with the casual authority of a being who had never known defeat. Weapons technician, are the singularity cannons charged? Charged and locked, Warlord, came the crisp reply. We are prepared to crack their primary moon as a demonstration of our power on your command. Kael'thar let a cruel smile cross his mandibles. Excellent. Communications officer, have the primitives responded to our ultimatum of unconditional surrender? Negative, Warlord. Their global networks are a chaos of panicked, contradictory broadcasts. They seem to be arguing amongst themselves. Their leaders are making defiant speeches, but their military response is negligible. A few dozen Fission-era projectiles are launching from their surface. Our point defense systems will handle them with ease. The Warlord chuckled, a low, guttural sound. Loud apes indeed. Very well, let them scream. Target their largest orbital satellite, a small show of force before we shatter their moon. Teach them the price of defiance. It was at that moment that everything changed. A new voice spoke over the bridge's internal comms, a voice that was not Vex. It was calm, serene, and distinctly female, the voice of Ambassador Aris Thorn, Warlord Kael'thar of the Vex Imperium, it said, without any static or distortion, as if she were standing on the bridge itself. This is your first and only warning. You have entered a restricted zone. Your presence here is a violation of interstellar protocols established before the birth of your star. Power down your weapons and retreat beyond the heliopause. Your transgression will be noted but forgiven. The bridge crew froze. A wave of confusion and alarm swept through them. Kael'thar's face contorted in a mask of fury. Who dares? How did you penetrate our comms? Identify yourself. We are the Wardens, the voice replied, its tone unchanged. This space is under our protection. It is not a conquest. It is a containment. Your weapons, your ship, your very presence here threatens to destabilize a delicate balance. You are ordered to retreat. There will not be a second warning. Kael'thar threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Wardens, containment. Your delusions are as pathetic as your technology. Fire on that satellite. Show these ghosts what real power looks like. The weapons technician, his hands trembling slightly, moved to obey. But as his claws touched the firing stud, a soft, golden light bloomed on the main view screen. It wasn't an explosion. It was a shimmering, a gentle, beautiful wave of energy that washed over the Vex armada. It was silent. It was peaceful, and it was the most terrifying thing any being in the Conclave had ever witnessed. On the screen, the fleet of Vex warships began to dissolve. They did not explode or break apart. They shimmered, their sharp, aggressive lines blurring, their metallic hulls becoming translucent like ghosts. The crew of the Indomitable will stared in horror as their sister ships faded from existence, one by one. There were no flashes of light, no energy beams, no torpedo trails. It was a process of quiet, inexorable unmaking. "Report what is happening," Kael'thar screamed, his arrogance shattering into raw panic. "What is that energy? Shields, raise the phase shields." A terrified science officer looked up from his console, his multifaceted eyes wide with disbelief. "Warlord, it's not energy, not in any form we can recognize. It's rewriting reality. Our shields are not deflecting it. They are being redefined. The laws of physics on the hull are fluctuating." The golden light washed over the view screen of the Indomitable Will, and the bridge itself began to shimmer. The hard edges of the consoles softened, the metal bulkheads seemed to flow like water. The Vex crew members cried out, not in pain, but in a profound, existential terror. They were not dying. They were being erased. Kael'thar stared at his own hands as they began to glow, to lose their substance. His final, agonized scream was not one of pain, but of pure, mind-shattering confusion. And then the recording ended. The hololith went dark, plunging the Grand Conclave into a stunned, absolute silence. The silence that followed the recording was deeper and more profound than any that had come before. It was a silence born not of waiting, but of shock. A silence filled with the ghosts of shattered paradigms. The Vex had built their empire on a simple, brutal truth: might make. Right, the strongest weapon, the biggest fleet, the most ruthless commander, these were the things that shaped the galaxy. But they had just witnessed a power that operated on a level so far beyond their comprehension that it rendered their entire philosophy meaningless. It was the difference between a club and a surgeon's scalpel, between a shout and a whisper that could rewrite the soul. They hadn't been defeated. They had been dismissed. Vorlag stared at the empty space where the recording had played, his mind struggling to process the implications. The humans had not just disarmed their fleet. They had deconstructed it, molecule by molecule, law by law. And they had done so with a gentleness, a precision, that was more terrifying than any act of violence. It was the power to unmake reality, wielded with the restraint of a monk. The image of Ambassador Aris Thorn reappeared on the hololith. Her expression was unchanged, still radiating that same calm, weary patience. But now the beings in the conclave saw her not as a frail, elderly female, but as the mouthpiece of a power that beggared belief. "Do you understand now, High Imperator?" she asked, her voice soft. "Your warlord was not attacking a primitive world. He was trying to smash down the door of a prison we have maintained for millennia." Grak the Gorok found his voice first, though it was a choked, strangled version of his usual bellow. "Prison? What are you talking about? Your world is a Class M planet rich in resources. It is a prize, not a cage." Ambassador Thorn shook her head slowly. "The planet is incidental. It is our home and we cherish it, but it is not what we are protecting. The containment is not physical. It is metaphysical. A wound in the fabric of space-time centered on our star system. Something was sealed within that wound eons ago by a power far older than my species or yours. We are not its creators. We are merely its inheritors, the Wardens." Gestured, and the view behind her changed. The simple gray wall dissolved, replaced by a live feed of space. It was the Sol system, but seen through human sensors. It looked different. There were faint, shimmering lines of force visible, a complex, multi-layered cage of golden energy that surrounded the entire system, extending far out into the Uit cloud. It was impossibly vast, impossibly intricate. "This is the containment field," she explained. "It is a delicate, multi-dimensional construct. It requires constant maintenance, constant vigilance. For 100,000 years, my people have done this work in secret and in silence. We have guided our own evolution, shaped our own technology for this single, solemn purpose. We have hidden ourselves from the galaxy, broadcasting signals of a primitive, chaotic society to discourage visitors, lest they stumble upon the truth and in their ignorance cause irreparable harm." Her gaze swept across the conclave, settling on each delegate in turn. "Your armada's arrival, the charging of their singularity cannons, the energy release from such weapons would have created a resonance cascade in the containment field. It would have torn a hole in the prison wall. We could not allow that. The entity that is sealed within must not be allowed to escape." A new kind of fear began to creep into the chamber, colder and deeper than the fear of human weapons. It was an ancient, primal fear, the fear of the dark, of the thing that lies beyond the firelight. "What is it?" Vorlag asked, his voice hushed. "What is this entity you are guarding?" Ambassador Thorne's face became grim, the first genuine, unguarded emotion she had shown. "We do not have a name for it. The original wardens left records, but they are more akin to warnings, to expressions of pure terror. It is not a being of matter and energy as we understand them. It is a consciousness of pure entropy, a will that desires nothing but the cessation of all things. The end of light, the end of time, the end of existence itself. It does not hate. It does not hunger. It simply undoes. Its escape would not lead to a war. It would lead to the quiet, inexorable heat death of the universe, accelerated to a moment. It would be the final, silent erasure of everything. The concept was so vast, so utterly final, that it was almost impossible to grasp. The political squabbles of the Vex Imperium, their conquests and their pride, all seemed like the meaningless games of insects scuttling on the surface of a planet that was about to be sterilized by its sun. "The warning we bring you today is not for our sake, but for yours," the ambassador continued, her voice regaining its steady, measured cadence. "The attack by your armada caused a minor fluctuation, a weakening in one of the outer layers of the field. We were able to compensate, to repair the damage, but we have been forced to automate the defense protocols. The next time a vessel approaches with hostile intent, with weapons charge, we will not have the luxury of a non-lethal disarmament. The system will respond instantly and with absolute prejudice. It will not distinguish between an ignorant trespasser and a genuine threat. It will simply sterilize the origin of the attack." She looked directly at Vorlag, her pale blue eyes filled with a heavy, ancient sorrow. "This is Earth's last warning to the galaxy. Attack again, and the response will be your extinction. Not because we are your enemies, but because we are the wardens of a threat so profound that we must prioritize the integrity of the containment over all other considerations. We cannot risk the safety of the universe for the sake of a single, reckless civilization." The finality of her words hung in the air, cold and sharp as glass. The phrase that had seemed like an arrogant boast from a primitive species, "attack again and die," was now revealed in its true, terrifying context. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, a promise of automated, impersonal, and absolute consequence. It was the warning sign on a cosmic fusion reactor, written in the blood of 1,000 forgotten civilizations. Humanity was not the aggressor they had imagined. They were the lonely, silent guardians on the wall, and the Vex had just tried to knock a hole in it. The weight of this revelation settled upon Vorlag, crushing him. He saw it all with a sudden, sickening clarity, the long silence of humanity, their strange, chaotic broadcasts, their refusal to join the galactic community. It wasn't weakness or arrogance. It was duty. A sacred, terrible duty that had been shouldered for 100 millennia, unknown and unthanked. He looked around the conclave at the stunned faces of his allies and vassals. The Gorak Grak was slumped in his seat, his biomechanical armor silent, his usual bluster completely gone, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. The Lumina Olena shimmered with a soft, respectful light, her thoughts a projection of deep, profound empathy for the burden the humans carried. The choice before Vorlag was clear. He could respond with the pride of a Vex warrior, reject the warning, and doom his people to either extinction by the hands of the wardens or, far worse, by the escape of the entropic entity. Or he could do something no Vex Imperator had done in recorded history. He could bow to a greater power, not in submission, but in alliance. He could accept the truth that his empire, his people, were but a small part of a much larger, much more dangerous universe. He rose to his full height, his crimson armor seeming less like a symbol of war and more like a fragile shell. He looked at the image of the old human woman, the warden, and for the first time he saw not a frail creature but a being of immense strength, a strength born not of weapons but of purpose. "Ambassador Aris Thorn," he said, and his voice for the first time was devoid of arrogance, filled only with a heavy, newfound respect. "Your warning has been received and it has been understood. The Vex Imperium will honor your quarantine. The Sol system will be declared a forbidden zone, its borders protected by our own fleets, not as a cage for you, but as a guard for us all." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched the ambassador's lips. "That is a wise decision, High Imperator, but our purpose here is not merely to deliver a warning. It is, as I said, also an invitation. The containment field is weakening, not because of your actions alone, but because of time. It is an ancient construct, and its power is failing. My people can no longer maintain it alone. We are too few, and the burden has become too great. We need help." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing. "We are inviting you and all the species of this galaxy who are willing to join us, to become wardens, to share the knowledge, the technology, the duty of protecting this universe from the great silence that waits outside. This is not a Vex problem or a human problem. It is a problem for all life." The offer was as staggering as the revelation that had preceded it. It was a chance to step beyond the petty squabbles of empire building, of resource acquisition, of conquest. It was a chance to participate in a cause that was truly meaningful, a struggle for the very existence of reality itself. It was the ultimate test, the final frontier. Vorlag looked at the faces of his conclave, and he saw not fear but a dawning sense of purpose. The thrum of their great empire had been the sound of complacent power. Perhaps a new thrum was needed. The sound of a galaxy united, of a million worlds standing guard together against the coming of the endless night. "Ambassador," Vorlag said, his voice ringing with a conviction he had not felt in centuries. "Tell us what you need." The years that followed were a time of unprecedented change. The Vex Imperium, an empire built on conquest, slowly, painstakingly, began to transform itself into an empire built on preservation. The initial alliance with humanity was a fragile thing built on a foundation of fear and awe, but it soon grew into something more profound. Human engineers and scientists, wardens who had spent their entire lives in the silent service, emerged from the Sol system. They were not warriors or conquerors. They were scholars, technicians, philosophers. They brought with them not weapons, but knowledge. The secrets of space-time engineering, of multi-dimensional mechanics, of the very architecture of reality. The Vex, a people who had perfected the art of destruction, now had to learn the far more difficult art of maintenance. Their great shipyards began to produce not dreadnoughts, but containment field projectors. Their finest warriors were retrained not to fight, but to patrol the quarantine zone, to stand guard alongside the silent, graceful ships of humanity. Other species, drawn by the momentous shift in galactic politics, came to join the alliance. The Lumina, with their vast archives of ancient lore, found prophecies and warnings of the entropic entity in their oldest records, confirming the humans' story and adding their own wisdom to the cause. The Gorok, their resource-driven pragmatism now channeled in a new direction, became the master builders of the alliance. Their industrial might turn to reinforcing the great cage. For the first time in galactic history, there was a true sense of unity, a shared purpose that transcended species, politics, and history. The old rivalries and hatreds did not vanish overnight, but they seemed petty and insignificant in the face of the silent, existential threat that lay imprisoned in the heart of the Sol system. Humanity, once seen as a primitive anomaly, was now revered as the first wardens, the elder siblings who had borne the terrible burden alone for so long. Ambassador Aris Thorn became a legendary figure, a symbol of the calm, ethical strength that had averted a war and forged a new age of cooperation. Vorlag, once a conqueror, found a new sense of fulfillment as a guardian. He often stood on the observation deck of his flagship, no longer looking for new worlds to conquer, but gazing at the shimmering, golden lines of the reinforced containment field. He had learned from the humans that the field was not just a barrier of energy. It was also a message, a beacon, broadcasting a single, complex idea on a frequency that transcended normal spacetime. It was the last testament of the original builders, the beings who had first imprisoned the entity. He had asked Aris Thorn what the message said, what wisdom these ancient, godlike beings had left for the universe. Her answer had been simple, and it had haunted him ever since. "It doesn't say anything," she had told him, her pale eyes filled with a distant sorrow. "It is a recording, the sound of their entire civilization screaming as they sacrificed themselves to activate the field." It was on a routine patrol near the edge of the quarantine zone, years into the new alliance, that a Vex science vessel made a discovery. They were charting the outer layers of the containment field, using new sensors developed with human technology when they detected an anomaly. It was not a fluctuation in the field itself, but something far older, something embedded within the very fabric of spacetime, something the field had been built around. It was a signal. Faint, structured, and impossibly ancient, far older than the containment field itself. It was not a message in any recognizable language. It was pure mathematics, a complex, repeating pattern that described the fundamental constants of the universe. It was a key waiting for a lock. When they brought the signal to the joint Human-Vex command, the human scientists, for the first time since they had revealed themselves, showed signs of genuine shock. Their records, their entire history as wardens, had never mentioned such a signal. They had been so focused on maintaining the prison that they had never looked for a message from outside it. Working together, the brightest minds of a dozen species began the arduous task of decoding the signal's deeper meaning. It was not a simple message. It was a multi-layered schematic, a blueprint of staggering complexity. As the final layers of the signal were unlocked, a stunned silence fell over the research team. It was not a warning. It was not a distress call. It was a map. A map that depicted not just their own galaxy, but countless others, strewn across the vast, dark canvas of the intergalactic void. And on that map, a single pathway was illuminated, a route leading from their own Milky Way to a distant, unnamed galaxy. But that was not the most shocking part. The schematic also showed their own containment field, the prison around Sol, and it showed dozens more scattered throughout their galaxy. Identical prisons, each containing an identical entropic entity. The Vex and their new allies had been focused on a single leaky reactor, unaware that they were living in a city full of them. The great silence humanity had been fighting was not a singular threat. It was a plague, and this ancient, hidden message was not just a map. It was an invitation to an evacuation route, a path to a safe harbor, a place beyond the encroaching, universal decay. The final line of decoded text, which appeared on the main screen, was not from the builders of the prison. It was from a species that had clearly received the same map long ago, a species that had chosen to flee. It read simply, "The last one's out, please close the door." The struggle to save one star system was over. A new, far more daunting struggle had just begun, the struggle to save a universe and to decide whether to stand and fight for a dying home or to take the long, dark road to a new beginning.